So there I was, minding my own business, thinking about my hatred of Incineroar, when I got an unexpected message. It was my friend Alpharad.
Hey, Ash team good?
Alpharad really knows how to ask the hard questions, and it really got me thinking. Ash has, at the time of making this video, competed in 7 anime Pokemon leagues. 7? Don't you mean 8? Well, here's what happened. We actually wrote the script, filmed, edited, finished this video about 6 months ago, but we ran into a pretty major issue while rendering, and we never actually got a way around it. And so I never posted this video despite having it done for like 6 months. And with everything that was going on, I was pretty busy at the time. Kind of forgot about it, I'm not gonna lie. Now, when I saw that Ash actually won the Pokemon World Tournament, I realized that we never posted this video and that we should probably do that because people are going to be interested in hearing about which of Ash's teams were the best. So just letting you know now, the rest of this video is obviously ranked out of 7. I will be talking about his current team at the very end after we finish talking about the #1 ranked team. So yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy, and this is how I rank each of Ash's champion teams. And his Pokemon have ranged from quite good to so I thought it'd be fun to go through and rank each of Ash's teams by how good they are by competitive Pokemon standards. Now, before we jump into the real meat of this video, we've got to lay out our ground rules. I'm trying to figure out how good the Pokemon are that Ash brought to these league championships, but you can't judge Pokemon in a vacuum. So we'll be comparing Ash's teams to other teams that would be legal for him to use. In other words, for his Johto team, we won't be considering any Pokemon added after Gen 2. For 2 of these teams, Ash only uses 3 Pokemon. So when judging those teams, we'll compare them to other 3 Pokemon teams. Normally when I rank teams, I use the official competitive format of Pokemon, which uses double battles as a basis. For this video, I think that makes a little less sense. So I'll just be talking about the overall Pokemon quality of Ash's teams without considering a specific format. I'm curious what you all think was Ash's weakest team. So before we jump into the rankings, let me know in the comments what you think the worst team is. Without further ado, let's start with our very first ranking. The absolute worst team that Ash has used at a league conference is, without a doubt, his Vertress conference team. This team just, blech. First of all, this team has Unfezant on it, so you already know it's the worst one. But even beyond that, there is a whole lot wrong with this team. For whatever reason, Ash seems to have forgotten the evolution mechanic exists and has left 5 of his Pokemon not in their final form. And the one Pokemon he did finish evolving was Unfezant, arguably the worst Pokemon of all time. If someone signed up to do coaching with me on Metafy and they showed up with this team, I would tell them I couldn't help them and refund their session. In all seriousness, the base stats of a Pokemon are probably the single biggest contributing factor in determining how good a Pokemon is. It's just really difficult to use a Pokemon when its stats are significantly worse than its peers. Base stats aren't the only factor in determining how good a Pokemon is. Pokemon like Weezing, Raichu, and even Venusaur can all be strong despite not having incredible base stats because of their abilities. But base stats do play a huge role. I don't personally think the Rotom forms are very good Pokemon, despite having great typing, ability, and move pool, in large part because their base stats don't allow them to excel at anything. While Rotom is balanced across the board, the overall lack of stats present makes it difficult to use. One of the key defining features of evolution is that your Pokemon stats get a sizable increase. By leaving nearly his whole team unevolved, Ash forfeits so many stats across the board, and it leaves his Unova team as by far his weakest. To Ash's credit, this team does have some things going for it. Although it has 3 Pokemon weak to ground, it also has an immunity and 2 resistances to ground. It has the classic Fire, Water, Grass core, which is known to be well balanced both defensively and offensively. And although Pikachu is on every one of Ash's teams, it's actually not a bad Pokemon due to the item Light Ball doubling its offensive stats. Everything else about this team is unfortunately not up to par. I think this team would have been extremely solid had every Pokemon been in its final form, and Unfezant had been replaced with, I don't know, a rock? But that's a topic for a different video. Oh yeah, if you're enjoying the content, I hope you'll consider subscribing. Currently, only about 4% of my audience is subscribed, so there's a lot of people watching and hopefully enjoying my content that haven't actually subscribed to the channel. Even if you think you're subscribed, I'd appreciate you double checking. Anyway, back to the list. Coming in at 6th place, Ash's Indigo Plateau Conference team. This is the first of our 3 against 3 teams, and unfortunately the lesser of the two. 3 against 3 is a difficult format because you have so many less defensive tools than when you have 6 Pokemon available. For that reason, when using a 3 Pokemon team, you need to make sure that each of your Pokemon either works as a flexible, defensive Pokemon capable of switching in and neutralizing threats, or a dangerous offensive damage dealer, sweeping through the opponent's team before they have a chance to threaten you. So, as you might imagine, Ash's Pokemon on this team don't really meet either criteria. First, you have Squirtle, which I like Squirtle. I even made a video with it way back in the day and was able to win some games. That being said, I wouldn't bring Squirtle to a tournament. Squirtle, as we mentioned earlier, is not fully evolved. Its stats leave a lot to be desired, both defensively and offensively. Its move pool isn't anything to write home about either. Although it gets solid supporting moves and the usual water and ice attacks, it's just so much worse than pretty much every fully evolved Generation 1 water type. If Squirtle had been fully evolved into Blastoise, it would have earned this team some extra points, but as is, it significantly holds it back. The remaining 2 members of this team, Charizard and Pikachu, really need support in order to shine. Both are moderately offensive, frail Pokemon that rely on their relatively high speed stats and strong offensive typings to shine. Without a defensive backbone to keep them alive, these fast, frail attackers face huge pressure from anything they can't knock out. The lack of defensive assets becomes even more pronounced after this team loses a Pokemon. Once Pikachu goes down, there's nothing stopping a strong electric type attack from blowing through this team. If Charizard goes down first, ground type attackers have a field day. Of course, this is partially an issue with every 3 Pokemon team, but it's especially egregious here. This team isn't all bad though. Pikachu is even more threatening in a 3v3 format because the opponent has fewer tools to resist its powerful electric type attacks. Charizard, under the right conditions, can exert enormous pressure on the opponent thanks to its speed stat in combination with its offensive capabilities. Overall, this team isn't unusable, but I'm not surprised that Ash failed to make a deep run with it. The next ranking on this list is going to make people upset. But I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm here to tell you what you need to hear. You're old enough to know the truth. Coming in at number 5 is Ash's Manalo Conference team, the one he finally won with. Oh boy, I am not looking forward to the comments on this one. It's Ash's other 3 Pokemon team, and one of his only teams where every Pokemon is evolved aside from Pikachu. Melmetal, Lycanroc, and Pikachu in a vacuum look strong, but as a whole, they have a major issue: their defense. Lycanroc, Melmetal, and Pikachu are all weak to ground types. If the opponent has a single ground type Pokemon, it would be extremely difficult to win. Moreover, these Pokemon all have abysmal special defense. Any moderately powerful special water move would leave this team with 0 switch-ins. Having no Pokemon that can switch in is a pretty massive deal. If your opponent ever finds themselves with a super effective move against your current Pokemon, there's no incentive at all for them to not click it if your other Pokemon can't safely switch in to take a hit. While Melmetal can switch in against certain physical attacks, it shares a number of weaknesses with Lycanroc, like ground and fighting. And unfortunately, due to its poor special bulk, it can't safely switch in against any strong neutral special attacks. We've talked about the negatives with the team, but I think it would be remiss of me to not discuss the team's strengths as well. Lycanroc is an interesting Pokemon. It has a higher base speed than most, as well as the priority move Excel Rock, allowing it to move before other Pokemon. It also has a signature Z move, giving it a delete button against teams without a rock resist. It also has some setup moves in its arsenal, giving it the potential to sweep teams if the opponent isn't careful. Melmetal is also not a Pokemon that should be written off. It's a legendary Pokemon with a powerful signature move, a good ability, a respectable move pool, great physical bulk, and the best defensive type in the game. If Ash had entered a 1v1 competition, Melmetal would be one of the single best Pokemon he could use. To summarize, Melmetal is a strong Pokemon, and both Lycanroc and Pikachu are huge threats for unprepared opponents. The major issue with this team, in addition to the abysmal defensive synergy, is how matchup dependent it feels. If the opponent can't resist your powerful rock, electric, and steel moves, you might be able to blow through them. If they do have resistances though, or even worse, if they can outspeed and threaten your Pokemon with strong ground, fighting, or generally neutral attacks like water, this team does not have the tools to stand its ground and claw its way back into the fight. Right in the middle of our list is Ash's Silver League Conference team. Pikachu, Noctowl, Totodile, Snorlax, Bayleef, and Charizard. I was really torn on whether this team belongs in the 4th or 5th slot, but in the end decided it had enough going for it to land it smack dab in the middle of our list. The reason this team earned its spot is because of how well balanced it is. You have offensive Pokemon Pikachu and Charizard, bulky Pokemon Snorlax and Bayleef, and Noctowl, which, you know, is the superb owl. Ash once again has forgotten to evolve half of his team, which is an interesting decision. Totodile is by far the single worst Pokemon on the team. Basically, everything I said earlier about Squirtle applies here, except that Totodile doesn't even have the good supporting moves to give it field presence. Let's talk about Bayleef next. Bayleef is a Pokemon I actually considered bringing to a tournament. In certain metagames, ground and water attacks are very popular, and grass having the ability to resist both makes it a surprisingly strong defensive option. Bayleef has a number of moves to help keep it around, such as Leech Seed and Synthesis, as well as the ability to support its team with Reflect and Light Screen. It has surprisingly decent base stats as well for a not fully evolved Pokemon, and with the Eviolite item becomes difficult to remove. Overall, it's one of the best unevolved Pokemon on any of Ash's teams. Pikachu we've already discussed, but I think it's worth noting that Pikachu gets more value on this team than any of the previous ones due to it having more Pokemon to switch into if it finds itself in an unfavorable matchup. We talked a bit about Charizard already as well, but similarly to Pikachu, it gets more value by having more Pokemon to switch into. It also has good synergy with Bayleef, with Bayleef threatening the rock and water type Pokemon that Charizard hates, and also being able to switch into water type attacks easily. Noctowl is a Pokemon I've used multiple times, and it's really impressed me. It does surprisingly good damage, and although its stats aren't anything to write home about, it manages to get the job done most of the time. Flying and Normal aren't an amazing pairing, they struggle to hit rock and steel type Pokemon in particular. But apart from that, Noctowl should be able to do a decent chunk to any Pokemon that doesn't resist it. Lastly, we have Snorlax. Snorlax is just such an incredible Pokemon. It can be a super bulky wall, it can be an offensive belly drum sweeper, it can use Curse to gradually become more threatening over time, it can run Rest and Sleep Talk. I could go on. It's an incredibly dynamic Pokemon that, thanks to only having one weakness, is incredibly difficult to remove. Snorlax is a Pokemon that can sweep entire teams against unprepared foes, or become impossible to remove if the checks are taken out. In the end, Snorlax's presence on this team is what earned it the 4th slot over Ash's Manalo Conference team. We're into the top 3 now. These teams are a cut above the rest in terms of the overall quality of the Pokemon. In 3rd place, we have Ash's Evergrande Conference team. Pikachu, Torkoal, Grovyle, Swellow, Glalie, and Corphish? Yeah, we'll get to that later. This conference takes place in Hoenn, obviously, and Ash actually has selected a pretty well-balanced team. Pikachu, Grovyle, and Swellow are fast and offensive, and threaten sweeps through opposing teams. But you also have Glalie, who is at least a little bulky and has great offensive typing, plus the super physically bulky Torkoal. With this team, there's multiple Pokemon that are extremely hard to deal with offensively, giving it a very good shot to overwhelm unsuspecting opponents. Let's talk about the individual Pokemon now. First, Corphish. This fills the Totodile or Squirtle role from previous teams, yet somehow it's even worse than either of those two Pokemon. Corphish is just not a good Pokemon. It's not even good on a playthrough of the game, let alone in a serious match. There's really no good reason to use Corphish, especially in a region with so many exciting and distinct water types. Next, Grovyle. Grovyle isn't a bad Pokemon per se, it just leaves a bit to be desired compared to Sceptile. Unlike Corphish, Grovyle is not completely worthless due to the value grass types provide, in addition to Grovyle's respectable speed stat. Grovyle doesn't have great coverage moves, bulk, or offensive stats, but it at least is not a dead slot compared to something like Corphish. Torkoal is the first Pokemon on the team I would actually consider good. I love this little guy, he's really just vibing. A truly outstanding defense stat allows Torkoal to shine, especially considering fire is actually not terrible defensive typing. Torkoal can be used against nearly any physical attacker without super effective moves, and even against some physical attackers with super effective moves. If used properly, Torkoal can really get under an opponent's skin. Shell? Next, let's talk about Glalie. Glalie is pretty much just your average ice type. It has no coverage moves and middling base stats across the board. The thing is, ice is a really good offensive type, especially in a region with Pokemon like Salamence and Flygon. Glalie can't switch in easily, but other Pokemon can't easily switch into it either. Thanks to the other offensive Pokemon on this team hopefully spreading damage around, anything that makes it to late game Glalie should have a lot of trouble taking powerful Ice-type attacks. Last but not least, the real star of this team, and the reason I ranked it so highly, Swellow. Swellow is truly one of the most threatening Pokemon in Generation 3. For those of you unfamiliar, Swellow has a monstrous speed stat, easily outspeeding nearly every relevant Pokemon. On top of that, it has the ability Guts, which boosts its attack by 50% if it's burned, poisoned, or paralyzed. This alone would make Swellow terrifying, but we aren't done yet. Swellow gets the move Facade, a 70 base power normal move that doubles in power if the user is affected by a status condition, and that's on top of the 50% increase from Guts. On top of that, Facade gets an additional 50% power boost because Swellow is a normal type and Facade is a normal move. All in all, Facade becomes 450% stronger when Swellow is burnt or poisoned. Overall, this is an offensive team with defensive tools available to it. It can easily overwhelm an opponent, but thanks to the good defensive synergy and few crucial defensive Pokemon, it isn't an all or nothing type of team. Which brings us to the team that earned the second spot on our list, Ash's Lily of the Valley Conference team. This team is comprised of Pikachu, Torkoal, Sceptile, Gible, Swellow, and Heracross. This is basically just a better version of Ash's Evergrande Conference team, so a lot of what I said about that team holds true here as well. You have Sceptile over Grovyle, Gible over Corphish, and Heracross over Glalie. Let's talk about how these changes impact the team. The biggest upgrade is Grovyle evolving into Sceptile. Sceptile, being the final form, is significantly stronger than Grovyle. It's incredibly fast, especially for Generation 4, has solid coverage moves on both the physical and special side, and even has interesting, more niche options like Swords Dance and Grass Whistle. The biggest deal with Sceptile, though, is its base stats. Grovyle has 125 fewer stat points than Sceptile, meaning Sceptile gains more stats from evolution than it does from Mega Evolving. All these extra stats make Sceptile a much better Pokemon, as it's faster, stronger, and bulkier. Within the context of this video, Grovyle is a D+ or C- tier Pokemon. It's not the worst Pokemon Ash has used, but it leaves a lot to be desired. Sceptile, by comparison, is probably B+ or A- given how much stronger it is. Next, let's talk about replacing Corphish with Gible. To be honest, although Gible is certainly stronger than Corphish, this isn't a very big deal because Gible is unfortunately not very good. Gible has better typing, stats, move pool, and ability than Corphish, so it isn't impossible that it could get some value at times, but it's by far the weakest Pokemon on this team. It does give a much needed rock resistance, which is valuable, but in order to get meaningful value out of resistances, you need to have the bulk to not take big damage from them anyway, which I'm not convinced Gible has. Gible does have the advantage of being immune to electric type attacks, meaning it actually has the ability to beat certain electric types in a 1v1 situation. All in all, Gible isn't good, but it's still an improvement nonetheless. The last change to this team is the use of Heracross over Glalie. Heracross is a solid Pokemon. It has meaningful resistances to grass, ground, and fighting, though it also has a huge 4x weakness to flying, as well as other common weaknesses. Heracross has similar bulk to Glalie, but it has a far superior offensive stat, as well as access to the powerful fighting type move, Close Combat. I like Heracross a lot on this team because of its synergy with Swellow. Swellow struggles against rock and steel type Pokemon that resist Facade. You know what's super effective against rock and steel? Fighting. Heracross increases the breadth of this team's offense, while also giving it additional resistances to play with defensively, overall providing more value than Glalie. So, last but not least, the strongest team Ash has used in a conference. If you've been keeping track of them so far, you already know the only team left, Ash's Lumiose Conference team. This team features Pikachu, Hawlucha, Ash Greninja, Goodra, Talonflame, and Noivern. Overall, the Pokemon quality on this team is just absurd. Ash actually remembered to evolve all of his Pokemon this time, which gives him a huge advantage over the rest of the teams on our list. More than just everything being in their final form, the specific Pokemon Ash has on this team are ridiculously strong. Hawlucha is a Pokemon capable of both supporting its teammates and sweeping through an opponent. Goodra is an incredibly bulky dragon type with great coverage. Noivern and Talonflame are both absurdly fast with respectable offenses. And of course, Ash Greninja is one of the strongest Pokemon to come out of Generation 6. That's not to say this team is unbeatable or without flaws, however. This team has 3 flying types with 0 rock resistances, and the only ice resistance is Greninja, who does not appreciate taking powerful ice moves. Aside from Goodra, the team is really frail and struggles to switch around in general. If it ever finds itself out of position, it would be difficult to stop an opponent from taking a KO or setting up and sweeping the whole team. Despite these weaknesses, in terms of the overall Pokemon quality, this team clearly stands out above the rest. Okay, you know what's before number 1 and number 0. This is the actual best team on this list, and I can say this with the benefit of hindsight since I'm from the future. Sorry, past Wolf, get wrecked. Okay, here's the deal. The Pokemon: Pikachu, Lucario, Gengar, Sirfetch'd, Dragonite, and Dracovish. This is unbelievable. This is one of Ash's only teams that doesn't have an unevolved Pokemon on it, aside from Pikachu, which doesn't count. But the specific Pokemon he chooses here are not only good, they have really good synergy with each other. You do have 2 dragon types, of course, but you also have a poison type in Gengar, and the dragon types actually don't really function the same way offensively because Dracovish is just a Fishious Red delete button. The specific quality of Pokemon Ash uses here is really high. Dragonite, thanks to multiscale, is super bulky, can also use Inner Focus to be a really good physical attacker. Gengar is a really strong fast special attacker with good coverage moves. Lucario hits hard and does good damage. Sirfetch'd is actually really respectably bulky and does a lot of damage because it's super strong. Pikachu, as always, is a good offensive Pokemon, but on a team like this, which is just really geared towards offense, it just does even better. And of course, in single battles, which is how we're ranking these teams, Dracovish is arguably one of the strongest Pokemon of all time, because if you get speed advantage, you can't switch into it. Like, unless you are literally immune to water type attacks, you cannot switch into it. And so the thing is that this team doesn't have the best defensive synergy. Like, you do have 2 fighting, 2 dragon types, and your only defensive switch into fairy is Gengar, which like isn't that good, but the sheer power level of the offense here is enough that I feel like it's the best team on this list. So yeah, with the benefit of hindsight, I would say that Ash's actual strongest team is the one that he used most recently. Now, as with all great researchers, I wanted a second opinion on my conclusion. So I reached out to Sarah Natochenny, the voice of Ash Ketchum, to ask her what she thought Ash's strongest team was.
Hey, this is Sarah Natochenny, the voice of Ash Ketchum, Delia Ketchum, and 26 Pokemon on the show Pokemon. And I think Gen 6 was his strongest team because Ash Greninja. That is all.
Well, that settles it. Thanks a bunch to Sarah for helping out with this video. If you enjoy this type of content, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.